The courtroom was unusually packed for a Tuesday morning. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies leaning forward, eager to catch every word of the high-stakes custody trial. The faint hum of whispered conversations filled the air, only to be silenced as the bailiff called for order. At the center of it all sat 6-year-old Noah Carter, his legs dangling from the edge of the witness stand, a tattered brown teddy bear clutched tightly in his arms. His large, curious eyes scanned the room, oblivious to the weight of what was about to unfold. Across the room, Judge Evelyn Eleanor adjusted her glasses and peered down at the boy. Her expression was calm, almost detached, the way judges are trained to appear. But there was something in the way her gaze lingered on Noah, an unspoken connection that no one in the room could have noticed just yet. The custody battle had already dragged on for months. As the attorneys began their opening arguments, the tension in the room grew. Eleanor, Rachel's lawyer, painted a picture of a mother who had struggled but never stopped loving her child. He spoke of second chances, of redemption, and of the importance of preserving cultural identity. Meanwhile, the Carter's attorney emphasized stability, security, and the life Noah had come to know, a life filled with love and opportunity. Each argument was delivered with precision, each word carefully chosen to sway the judge's decision. And then, the room fell silent. Judge Eleanor leaned forward, her hands clasped together. She addressed Noah directly, her voice calm yet firm. "Noah," she said, "I know this is hard for you, but can you tell us who you feel safest with? Who do you want to live with?" The boy shifted in his seat, his tiny fingers tracing the worn edges of his teddy bear. For a moment, it seemed as though he wouldn't answer. His eyes darted across the room, toward Rachel, then to the Carters, and finally, to the judge. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. And then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said something no one expected. He pointed toward the judge and said, "You're my mom." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The courtroom, once bustling with energy, now felt eerily quiet. All eyes were on Judge Eleanor, who seemed momentarily lost for words. The weight of Noah's statement hung in the air, demanding answers to questions no one had even thought to ask. Before we continue, we want to share an important reminder. Over 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed to this channel yet. If you believe in creating a world where justice and equality prevail, please take a moment to support us by subscribing and turning on notifications. Together, we can amplify stories like this and take a stand against racism. Tell us where you are listening from. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. We value your voice in this fight. Judge Evelyn Eleanor sat motionless for a moment, her eyes fixed on the boy who had just turned the entire courtroom on its head. By the time she reached high school, she was already dreaming of something bigger, a life where she could challenge the very systems that had held her family and so many others back. At 17, she graduated valedictorian and left for college on a scholarship. It was a proud moment for her parents, but it came with a cost. Evelyn was stepping into a world far removed from her roots, and the further she climbed, the more distant she became from the life she had known. College was a revelation for Evelyn. It exposed her to new ideas, new people, and new ways of thinking. But it also revealed the subtle and overt ways racism could infiltrate even the most prestigious spaces. She faced microaggressions from classmates, doubts from professors, and the constant pressure to prove herself. Still, she pushed forward, determined to make her mark. It was during her second year of law school that Evelyn's life took a turn she never could have anticipated. She had been volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, helping families navigate complicated custody battles and housing disputes. It was there she met Rachel Monroe. Rachel was 22 at the time, a single mother barely scraping by. She had come to the clinic seeking help to avoid eviction. Her young son, Noah, perched on her hip. Rachel was shy, almost guarded, but there was an undeniable strength in the way she spoke about her son. To her, Noah was everything. The reason she worked double shifts at the diner, the reason she fought so hard to stay afloat. Evelyn and Rachel formed an unlikely connection. Though their lives had taken different paths, there was something familiar in Rachel's story that resonated with Evelyn. She saw herself in Rachel's struggles, in her quiet resilience, and in the way she clung to hope even when the odds were stacked against her. Over the months that followed, Evelyn became more than just Rachel's legal advocate. She became a confidant, a mentor, and in some ways, a surrogate sister. But life had other plans. Just as Rachel was beginning to regain her footing, tragedy struck. A car accident on a rainy November night left her hospitalized for weeks. With no family to turn to, Rachel made a desperate decision, one that would change everything. She entrusted Noah to social services, believing it was the only way to ensure his safety while she recovered. She thought it would be temporary, a short-term solution to a long-term problem. But temporary became permanent, and before Rachel could fully grasp what was happening, Noah had been placed with the Carters. The loss of her son shattered Rachel. She tried to fight the system, but the odds were against her. The Carters were everything the courts wanted for a child: stable, loving, financially secure. By the time Rachel was physically and emotionally ready to fight for Noah, the legal wheels had already turned too far. The adoption had been finalized, and Rachel was left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. Years passed. Rachel worked tirelessly to rebuild her life, but the ache of losing Noah never went away. And then, one day, she saw him. It was a chance encounter at a park, a fleeting moment that reignited a fire she thought had long been extinguished. Noah didn't recognize her, of course. He was just a boy, laughing with his adoptive parents, completely unaware of the woman watching from a distance. But for Rachel, that moment changed everything. She decided then and there that she would do whatever it took to bring her son back. As for Evelyn Eleanor, her path took her to the bench, where she became known for her fairness and integrity. She never imagined that her past would one day collide with her present in the most unexpected way. But as she sat in that courtroom, staring at the boy who had just pointed at her and called her Mom, she realized that some connections defy logic, reason, and even time itself. The weight of the boy's words pressed down on everyone in the room, but for Judge Eleanor, it was more than just a shocking moment. It was a fracture, a fault line splitting her composure. And yet, the rules of the court demanded she remain impartial, even as the walls of her carefully constructed world began to tremble. The silence in the room was broken by the prosecuting attorney, who cleared his throat and quickly tried to regain control of the proceedings. "Your Honor," he began, his voice tinged with unease, "we can't allow an outburst like this to distract from the facts at hand." But no one in the room, not even the seasoned lawyers, could truly return to business as usual after what had just occurred. Rachel Monroe's attorney, sensing the shift in the courtroom's energy, seized the moment. "Your Honor," he said, standing with a measured but firm tone, "I believe the child's statement deserves some consideration. It's not every day that a young boy makes such a profound and unprompted declaration." Judge Eleanor straightened in her seat, her face now carefully neutral, betraying none of the storm swirling beneath. "Mr. Klein," she addressed Rachel's attorney, "while I acknowledge the significance of the child's statement, we must remain focused on the legal matters at hand. This is a custody hearing, not a forum for speculation." But the boy's words had already planted a seed in everyone's mind, one that could not be easily ignored. For Rachel, it was a spark of hope, proof, perhaps, that Noah still felt some connection to her despite their years apart. For the Carters, it was a jarring moment, a reminder of the complexities of adoption and the lingering ties of biology. And for the judge, it was something else entirely, a collision of past and present that she couldn't yet fully comprehend. As the attorneys continued their arguments, the courtroom became a battlefield of words and emotions. Rachel's lawyer focused on the importance of identity and the right of a mother to reclaim her child. He painted a vivid picture of a woman who had faced insurmountable odds, who had rebuilt her life and was ready to provide her son with the love and stability he deserved. "This is not just a legal matter," he argued. "It's a question of justice, of giving a mother the chance to be what she was always meant to be." On the other side, the Carters' attorney countered with precision, emphasizing the child's best interests. He highlighted the stable and nurturing environment they had provided for Noah, the opportunities he had been given, and the strong bond he had formed with them. Noah has known only one family for most of his life, he argued. Disrupting that now would not only be traumatic, but could have long-term consequences for his emotional well-being. Throughout the back and forth, Noah sat quietly, his legs swinging slightly beneath the chair. He seemed oblivious to the gravity of the arguments being made about his future. But every so often, his gaze would drift toward Judge Eleanor, his small face wearing an expression that no one could quite decipher. As the day wore on, witnesses were called to the stand. A social worker testified about Noah's adoption process, explaining how the Carters had been chosen based on their ability to provide a stable and loving home. She spoke of their dedication, their involvement in Noah's education, and their unwavering commitment to his happiness. But under cross-examination, Rachel's lawyer questioned whether enough effort had been made to reunite the boy with his biological mother before finalizing the adoption. "Did anyone truly fight for her?" he asked pointedly. The social worker hesitated, her silence speaking volumes. Then it was Rachel's turn. She took the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she recounted her story. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of years of pain and longing. She spoke of the night she let Noah go, the nights she spent crying herself to sleep, and the moment she decided to fight for him, no matter how long it took. "He's my son," she said simply. "I've made mistakes, but I've never stopped loving him. I've never stopped believing that we belong together." The Carters watched her intently, their expressions a mixture of empathy and determination. When it was their turn to testify, they spoke with equal passion. Sarah Carter described the joy Noah had brought into their lives, the milestones they had celebrated together, and the deep love they felt for him. "He's our son in every way that matters," she said, her voice breaking. "We just want what's best for him." By the time closing arguments began, the courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, every word adding to the tension. Rachel's attorney appealed to the judge's sense of justice, urging her to consider the importance of a child's connection to their biological parent. The Carters' lawyer, meanwhile, emphasized the need for stability and continuity in a young boy's life. Both sides presented compelling cases, leaving the decision in Judge Eleanor's hands. As the attorneys finished, the judge called a recess to deliberate. The courtroom emptied slowly, the buzz of whispered conversations filling the air once more. But for Judge Eleanor, there was no escape from the questions now swirling in her mind. She retreated to her chambers, where she sat alone, staring at the case files in front of her. And though the law offered guidelines, this decision would demand more than legal expertise. It would require something far more personal. When the court reconvened, all eyes were on Judge Eleanor. The time had come for her to deliver her ruling, but as she looked out at the faces before her, she realized that no matter what she decided, the consequences would be profound. For Rachel, for the Carters, and for the boy who had called her Mom, this was a moment that would shape their lives forever. Judge Evelyn Eleanor returned to the bench, her face composed, her hands resting lightly on the polished wood in front of her. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, every breath held as the people waited for her to speak. But instead of delivering an immediate verdict, she did something no one expected. "Before I make my ruling," she began, her voice steady, "there are questions that I believe need answers. This case is not just about legal arguments or social work assessments. It is about a child, a boy who deserves clarity, honesty, and the opportunity to be heard." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then, she turned her gaze to Noah. "Noah," she said gently, "do you remember why you called me Mom earlier?" The room fell silent again as Noah's small voice filled the space. "I don't know," he said softly, looking down at the bear in his lap. You look like her." His words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful, and suddenly the courtroom wasn't just a stage for legal arguments anymore. It was a place where unspoken truths and buried emotions had begun to rise to the surface. Judge Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Noah," she continued after a moment, "can you tell me more about the her you're talking about? Who do I remind you of?" The boy hesitated, then looked over at Rachel. "Her," he said, pointing toward his biological mother. "But different. I don't know. Just kind of the same." A murmur spread through the room as the implications of Noah's words began to take shape. For Rachel, it was a moment of vindication, a flicker of proof that her son hadn't completely forgotten her. For the Carters, it was another reminder of the complexities they had tried so hard to shield Noah from. And for Judge Eleanor, it was the beginning of a revelation that would shake her to her core. Rachel's attorney seized the opportunity. "Your Honor," he said, standing, "I believe there is a deeper connection at play here, one that warrants further exploration. With your permission, I would like to call a witness to provide clarity on this matter." Judge Eleanor raised an eyebrow but nodded, allowing him to proceed. The doors of the courtroom opened, and an older woman stepped inside, a woman Judge Eleanor hadn't seen in decades. Her name was Margaret Davis, a retired social worker who had been instrumental in many of the adoption cases during Judge Eleanor's early career. Margaret walked slowly to the stand, her cane tapping softly against the floor. She swore her oath, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at Judge Eleanor. "Evelyn," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "we need to talk about what happened all those years ago." The room erupted in whispers, the air buzzing with curiosity. Judge Eleanor's composure faltered for the first time, her hands gripping the edges of her bench. "Please clarify what you mean, Ms. Davis," she said, her voice measured but carrying an undertone of unease. Margaret took a deep breath. "It was over 20 years ago," she began, her gaze fixed on the judge. "You were fresh out of law school, working at the legal aid clinic. Do you remember the Monroe case?" Judge Eleanor's face froze. Of course, she remembered. The Monroe case had been one of the first she'd worked on, an adoption that had left her with lingering questions she had never fully answered. Margaret continued. "Back then, the Monroe family had approached us for help. They were struggling, barely able to make ends meet. Their youngest daughter, Rachel, was just a teenager at the time. She became pregnant, and the family couldn't see a way forward. The baby was placed into foster care shortly after he was born. It was a closed adoption, Evelyn, but there were irregularities in the process." The judge's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. "What kind of irregularities?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret hesitated before responding. "The files were sealed, but I remember the conversations. There was pressure to expedite the adoption, to make it look clean on paper. I didn't realize until later that the birth records had been altered. Evelyn, the boy Rachel lost was listed under your name. You were his temporary guardian." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the revelation sunk in. Judge Eleanor's vision blurred for a moment, her grip tightening on the bench as she struggled to process the bombshell. She was Noah's guardian? How could this be? She had never known. Had she? Margaret continued, her voice breaking slightly. "You didn't know at the time, Evelyn. You were young, new to the system, and trusting of the people around you. But I've seen the records since. Noah is connected to you, even if only through that brief moment in time." The courtroom was a maelstrom of emotions. Rachel's face was a mixture of shock and confusion, while the Carters looked on, struggling to comprehend what this meant for their family. As for Noah, he sat quietly, his small hands gripping his teddy bear as if it were the only constant in a world suddenly turned upside down. Judge Eleanor took a deep breath, her mind racing with questions and memories she hadn't revisited in years. She had always prided herself on fairness, on impartiality, but now the lines between her past and present were blurring in ways she couldn't control. She knew that whatever decision she made next would change everything, not just for Noah, but for everyone in the room, including herself. Finally, Judge Eleanor spoke, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "This court will adjourn for the day," she announced, her gavel coming down with a sharp crack. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning." The tension in the room remained thick as people filed out, the weight of what had been revealed pressing heavily on every step. And as Judge Eleanor retreated to her chambers, she knew that the most difficult part of this journey was still ahead. The polished wood of her desk felt cold beneath her hands as she sat down, her mind reeling from the revelations of the day. The walls of her office, usually a refuge, seemed to close in around her, A file sat unopened on her desk, a file she now realized might hold answers she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. But avoiding the truth was no longer an option. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the neatly typed pages. There it was, buried among bureaucratic jargon and legal documentation. Her name, listed as a temporary guardian for a newborn boy over 2 decades ago. A boy who had been transferred into foster care shortly after. Her breath caught as she realized what this meant, not just for her, but for Noah, for Rachel, and for the Carters. The past she thought she had left behind was now intertwined with their present in ways none of them could have imagined. The next morning, the courtroom was filled with a nervous energy. The people who had gathered for the hearing the day before were back, their conversations hushed but charged with anticipation. When Judge Eleanor entered the room, the murmurs quieted instantly. She took her seat, her expression resolute yet tinged with something deeper, a vulnerability she rarely allowed to surface in public. This has been one of the most complex and emotionally charged cases I have ever presided over, she began, her voice steady but soft. It is not just a matter of law, but of humanity. At the heart of this case is a child who deserves love, stability, and truth. As a judge, I am bound by the law. But as a person, I cannot ignore the lives and histories of those sitting before me. She turned to Rachel first. Ms. Monroe, your journey has been one of extraordinary resilience. It is clear that your love for your son is unwavering, and your determination to reunite with him speaks to the bond that no time or distance can erase. Your story is a testament to the power of hope. Then, she looked toward the Carters. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, you have provided Noah with a stable and loving home. You have given him opportunities and care that every child deserves. Your commitment to his well-being is beyond question, and it is evident that you see him as your son in every sense of the word. Her gaze then fell on Noah, sitting quietly in the witness stand, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. Noah, she said gently, you are a remarkable young boy. You have shown courage and honesty in a situation that would be overwhelming for anyone, let alone someone your age. I want you to know that everyone in this room cares deeply about you and wants what is best for you. A pause hung in the air as the judge collected her thoughts. Then, she continued, addressing everyone in the room. The decision I am about to make is not one I take lightly. It has been informed by the law, by the evidence presented, and by the personal testimonies I have heard over the past few days. But more than anything, it has been guided by what I believe will serve Noah's best interests. The room was so quiet that even the faintest sound seemed amplified. Judge Eleanor took a deep breath before delivering her ruling. It is the decision of this court that Noah will remain in the custody of the Carters. However, I am also mandating a structured reunification plan to allow Ms. Monroe to rebuild a relationship with her son. This plan will include supervised visitation, family counseling, and a gradual increase in contact over time, with the goal of fostering a healthy and stable relationship between Noah and his biological mother. The collective exhale from the room was almost palpable. For the Carters, it was a bittersweet victory, relief that Noah would stay with them, but an understanding that their family would now include a new dynamic. For Rachel, it was a chance, a sliver of hope that she had longed for, though it came with the knowledge that the road ahead would not be easy. And for Noah, it was the beginning of a journey to piece together the fragments of his story. But Judge Eleanor wasn't finished. There is one more matter I wish to address, she said, her tone firm but kind. Yesterday, Noah made a statement that caught all of us by surprise. He looked at me and called me Mom. At the time, it was a shock. But after reviewing the case history and speaking with those involved, I now understand why he may have felt that connection. She paused, her voice softening. Noah, many years ago, I was briefly assigned as your guardian while decisions were being made about your future. You were just a baby then, too young to remember, but perhaps there's a part of you, a deeper part, that recognizes something familiar in me. I want you to know that your words yesterday meant a great deal to me, but my role here is to serve as your judge, not your parent. The courtroom was silent as her words settled over everyone. For Judge Eleanor, it was a moment of closure, not just for the case, but for a chapter of her life she hadn't realized was still open. And for Noah, it was an affirmation that even in the most complicated situations, he was surrounded by people who cared deeply for him. As the hearing concluded, Rachel approached the Carters with tentative steps. There was a moment of hesitation, a moment where decades of pain and uncertainty hung between them. But then Sarah Carter extended her hand, and Rachel took it. They didn't speak, but the gesture was enough. A first step toward a new kind of family, one built not on shared blood but on shared love for a boy who had brought them together. The story of Noah, Rachel, the Carters, and Judge Eleanor didn't end that day. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges but also possibilities. For Noah, it was a chance to know the full story of who he was. For Rachel, it was a chance to reclaim the role she had lost. And for the Carters, it was a reminder that family isn't defined by boundaries, but by the bonds we choose to nurture. And as for Judge Eleanor, it was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. That even in the most tangled of circumstances, truth, love, and justice could still find a way to prevail.